Hello and welcome back, everybody. Today we are going to be reading a Sena story from the Zambesi region, translated by Andrew Lang. The story is called The Story of the Hero, Makoma. Once upon a time, at the town of Sena on the banks of the Zambesi was born a child. He was not like other children, for he was very tall and strong. Over his shoulder he carried a big sack, and in his hand an iron hammer. He could also speak like a grown man, but usually was very silent. One day his mother said to him, "My child, by what name shall we know you?" And he answered, "Call all the headmen of Sena here to the river's bank." And his mother called the headmen of the town, and when they had come, he led them down to a deep black pool in the river where all the fierce crocodiles lived. "O great men," he said, while they all listened, "which of you will leap into the pool and overcome the crocodiles?" But no one would come forward, so he turned and sprang into the water and disappeared. The people held their breath, for they thought, "Surely the boy is bewitched and throws his life away, for the crocodiles will eat him." Then suddenly the ground trembled, and the pool, heaving and swirling, threw up violently, and presently the boy rose to the surface and swam to the shore. As the crocodiles floated to the edges of the banks, he was no longer just a boy. He was stronger than any man and very tall and handsome, so that the people shouted with gladness when they saw him. "Now, O my people," he cried, waving his hand, "you know my name. I am Makoma, the Greater, for I have not slain the crocodiles into the pool where none would venture." Then he said to his mother, "Rest gently, my mother, for I go to make a home for myself and become a hero." Then entering his hut, he took Nu-endo, his iron hammer, and throwing the sack over his shoulder, he went away. Makoma crossed the Zambesi, and for many moons he wandered towards the north and west until he came to a very hilly country where, one day, he met a huge giant making mountains. "Greetings," shouted Makoma. "Who are you?" "I am Chieswa Mapiri, who makes the mountains," answered the giant. "And who are you?" "I am Makoma, which signifies greater," answered he. "Greater than who?" asked the giant. "Greater than you," answered Makoma. The giant gave a roar and rushed upon him for his indignance. Makoma said nothing, but swinging his great hammer, Nu-endo, he struck the giant upon the head. He struck him so hard a blow that the giant shrank into quite a little man, who fell upon his knees, saying, "You are indeed greater than I, O Makoma. Take me with you to be your servant." So Makoma picked him up and dropped him into the sack he carried on his back. He was greater now than ever, for all the giant's strength had gone into him, and he resumed his journey, carrying his burden with as little difficulty as an eagle might carry a hare. Before long, he came to a country broken up with huge stones and immense clots of earth. Looking over one of the heaps, he saw a giant wrapped in dust, dragging out the very earth and hurling it in handfuls on either side of him. "Who are you," cried Makoma, "that pulls up the earth in this way?" "I am Chidubula Taka," he said. "I am the maker of riverbeds." "Do you know who I am?" said Makoma. "I am he that is called Greater." "Greater than who?" thundered the giant. "Greater than you," answered Makoma. With a shout, Chidubula Taka seized a great clod of earth and launched it at Makoma. But the hero held his sack over his left arm, and the stones and earth fell harmlessly upon it. And tightly gripping his iron hammer, he rushed in and struck the giant to the ground. Chidubula Taka groveled before him, all the while growing smaller and smaller, and when he had become convenient size, Makoma picked him up and put him into the sack beside Chieswa Mapiri. He went on his way, even greater than before, as all the Rivermaker's power had become his, and at last he came to a forest of baobabs and thorn trees. He was astonished at their size, for every one was full grown and larger than any trees he had ever seen. And close by he saw Chiguisa-miti, the giant who was planting the forest. Chiguisa-miti was taller than either of his brothers, but Makoma was not afraid and called out to him, "Who are you, O big one?" "I," said the giant, "am Chiguisa-miti, and I am planting these baobabs and thorns as food for my children the elephants. Leave off, shouted the hero, for I am Makoma, and I would like to exchange a blow with thee. The giant, plucking up a monster baobab by the roots, struck heavily at Makoma, but the hero sprang aside, and as the weapon sank deep into the soft earth, he whirled Nu-endo, the hammer, round his head and felled the giant with one blow. So terrible was the stroke that Graeyscape shriveled up as the other giants had done, and when he had got back his breath, he begged Makoma to take him for his servant. For, he said, it is honorable to serve he who is greater than you. Makoma, after placing him in his sack, proceeded upon his journey and traveled for many days. He at last reached a country so barren and rocky that not a single living thing grew upon it. Everywhere reigned grim desolation, and in the midst of this dead region he found a man eating fire. "What are you doing?" demanded Makoma. "I am eating fire," answered the man, laughing. "For my name is Moto, and I am the flame spirit, and can waste and destroy what I like." "You are wrong," said Makoma, "for I am Makoma, who is greater than you, and you cannot destroy me." The fire eater laughed again and blew flame at Makoma, but the hero sprang behind a rock just in time, for the ground upon which he had been standing turned into molten glass, like an overbaked pot, by the heat of the flame spirit's breath. Then the hero flung his iron hammer at Moto, and striking him, it knocked him helpless. And so Makoma placed him in the sack, Woro no Nowu, with the other great men that he had overcome. Now truly, Makoma was a very great hero, for he had the strength to make hills, the industry to lead rivers over dry wastes, foresight and wisdom in planting trees, and the power of producing fire when he wished. Wandering on, he arrived one day at a great plain, well watered and full of game. In the middle of it, close to a large river, was a grassy spot, very pleasant to make a home upon. Makoma was delighted, and the little meadow that he sat down under a large tree and, removing the sack from his shoulder, took out all the giants and set them before him. "My friends," said he, "I have traveled far and am weary. Is not this such a place that would suit a hero for his home? Let us then go tomorrow to bring timber to make a kraal." So the next day, kraal is village or town. So the next day, Makoma and the giant set out to get poles to build the kraal, leaving only Mapiri to look after the place and cook some venison which they had killed. In the evening, when they returned, they found the giant helpless and tied to a tree by one enormous hair. "How is it," said Makoma, astonished, "that we find you thus helpless and bound?" "Oh, chief," answered Mapiri, "at midday a man came out of the river. He was of immense stature, and his gray mustaches were at such a length that I could not see where they ended. He demanded of me, 'Who is thy master?' And I answered, 'Makoma, the greatest of heroes.' Then the man seized me, and pulling a hair from his mustache, tied me to the tree, even as you see me now." Makoma was very angry. He said nothing, and drawing his fingernail across the hair, which was as thick and strong as a palm rope, cut it, and set free the mountain maker. The 3 following days, exactly the same thing happened, only each time with a different member of the party. And on the 4th day, Makoma stayed in camp, when the others went to cut poles, saying that he would see for himself what sort of man this was that lived in the river and whose mustaches were so long that they extended beyond men's sight. So when the giants had gone, he swept and tidied the camp and put some venison on the fire to roast. At midday, when the sun was right overhead, he heard a rumbling noise from the river. And looking up, he saw the head and shoulders of an enormous man emerging from it. And behold, right down the riverbed and up the riverbed till they faded into the blue distance, stretched the giant's gray mustache. "Who are you?" bellowed the giant as soon as he was out of the water. "I am he that is called Makoma," answered the hero. "For before I slay thee, tell me also what is thy name, and what do you do in the river?" "My name is Chindebu Magiri," said the giant. "My home is in the river. For my mustache is the gray fever mist that hangs above the water, with which I bind all those who come to me so that they may die." "You cannot bind me," shouted Makoma, rushing upon him and striking with his hammer. But the river giant was so slimy that a blow slid harmlessly off his green chest, and as Makoma stumbled and tried to regain his balance, the giant swung one of his long hairs around and tripped him up. For a moment, Makoma was helpless, but remembering the power of the flame spirit which had entered into him, he breathed fiery breath upon the giant's hair and cut himself free. As Chindebu Magiri leaned forward to seize him, the hero flung his sack, Wanoru, over the giant's slippery head, and gripping his iron hammer, struck him again. This time the blow alighted upon the dry sack, and Chindebu Magiri fell dead. When the four giants returned at sunset with poles, they rejoiced to find that Makoma had overcome the fever spirit, and they feasted on the roast venison till far into the night. But in the morning, when they awoke, Makoma was already warming his hands to the fire, and his face was gloomy. "In the darkest of the night, O my friends," he said presently, "the spirits of my fathers came upon me and spoke, saying, 'Get thee hence, Makoma, for thou shalt have no rest until thou hast found and fought the Sakatarina, who had 5 heads and is very great and strong. So take leave of thy friends, for you must go alone.'" Then the giants were very sad and bewailed the loss of their hero, but Makoma comforted them and gave back to each of them the gifts that he had taken from them. Then bidding them farewell, he went on his way. Makoma traveled far towards the west over rough mountains and waterlogged morasses, fording deep rivers and tramping for days across dry deserts where most men would have died, until at length he arrived at a hut standing near some large peaks, and inside the hut were 2 beautiful women. "Greetings," said the hero. "Is this the country of Sakatarina, of 5 heads, who I am seeking?" "We greet you, O great one," answered the women. "We are the wives of Sakatarina. Your search is at an end, for there stands he whom you seek." And they pointed to what Makoma had thought were 2 tall mountain peaks. "Those are his legs," they said. "His body you cannot see, for it is hidden in the clouds." Makoma was astonished when he beheld how tall the giant was, but nothing would daunt him. He went forward until he reached one of Sakatarina's legs, which he struck heavily with Nu-endo. Nothing happened, so he hit again and again, until presently he heard a tired, faraway voice saying, "Who is it that scratches my feet?" And Makoma shouted as loud as he could, answering, "It is I, Makoma, who is called Greater." And he listened, but there was no answer. Then Makoma collected all the dead brushwood and trees that he could find, and making an enormous pile around the giant's legs, set light to it. This time the giant spoke. His voice was very terrible, for it was the rumble of thunder in the clouds. "Who is it," he said, "making that fire smolder around my feet?" "It is I, Makoma," shouted the hero, "for I have come from very far away to see thee, O Sakatarina. For the spirits of my fathers bade me go seek and fight with thee, lest I grow fat and weary of myself." There was silence for a while, and then the giant spoke softly. "It is good, O Makoma," he said, "for I too have grown weary. There is no man so great as I, therefore I am all alone. Guard thyself." And bending suddenly, he seized the hero in his hands and dashed him upon the ground, and lo, instead of death, Makoma found life. For he sprang to his feet, mightier in strength and stature than before, and rushing in, he gripped the giant by the waist and wrestled him. Hour by hour they fought, and mountains rolled beneath their feet like pebbles in a flood. Now Makoma would break away, summoning up his strength, and strike the giant with Nu-endo, his iron hammer. And Sakatarina would pluck up the mountains and hurl them upon the hero, but neither one could slay the other. At last, upon the second day, they grappled so strongly that they could not break away, but their strength was failing, and just as the sun was sinking, they fell together to the ground, insensible. In the morning when they awoke, Mulimo, the great spirit, was standing by them, and he said, "O Makoma and Sakatarina, ye are heroes so great that no man may come against you. Therefore, you will leave this world and take up your home with me in the clouds. And as he spoke, the heroes became invisible to the people of the earth and were no more seen among them.